Welcome. I'm Eric Fleming, host of A Moment with Eric Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Eric Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenteric.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoy this episode as well. Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Eric Fleming. I am your host, Eric Fleming. All righty, what a week, huh? Yeah. I'll get into that as we close out, but I have two very, very special guests, some powerful sisters coming on, and really wanted to highlight the work that they're doing. And we've got a little international flavor because one of the guests is from across the pond in the UK. And we're going to have a good show. I think you're going to really, really appreciate it and enjoy it. But now, let's go ahead and get it started, and we'll kick it off with a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Eric. A New York jury found Donald Trump guilty on 34 felony counts in his hush money trial. Judge Eileen Cannon refused to issue a gag order preventing Donald Trump from making inflammatory comments about law enforcement. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito will not recuse himself from cases involving Donald Trump, despite reports that flags associated with Trump supporters were flown at Alito's residences. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced an investigation into a deadly airstrike in Rafah, Gaza, that killed dozens of Palestinians. Partial South African election results indicate that the African National Congress is set to lose the parliamentary majority it has held for 30 years. Louisiana's governor signed a bill reclassifying 2 abortion-inducing medications as controlled substances, making it harder for residents to obtain them. The NCAA agreed to allow schools to share revenue with athletes and pay nearly $2.8 billion in damages. American Airlines faces a lawsuit for allegedly removing 3 black men from a flight due to racial discrimination. The U.S. Supreme Court has revived the NRA's lawsuit against a New York official for allegedly coercing banks and insurers to shun the gun rights group. The U.S. Supreme Court also refused to hear Michael Avenatti's appeal to overturn his conviction for extorting Nike. The Democratic National Committee will conduct a virtual roll call to nominate Joe Biden before the Ohio legal certification deadline. And Bill Walton, a celebrated NBA champion and broadcaster, passed away at the age of 71 after battling cancer. I am Grace G, and this has been A Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, as always, for that moment of news. Now, it is time for my first guest, Sabrina Clarke. Sabrina's mission is to create space, tell beautifully complex stories, make our world sustainable, and disrupt so there is access. The golden brain is a term used for individuals who operate adeptly with both the left and right sides of their brain. The golden brain accurately describes Sabrina's approach and the portfolio she has designed. Sabrina is the managing partner of Build Global, her company. Sabrina took her experience from roles such as senior manager at Ernst & Young and vice president investment banking and structured capital markets to start her company. Build Global is an award-winning strategy firm that provides energy, financial services, pharmaceutical, and technology companies with strategy, transformation, and sustainability services. Also a creative, Sabrina is the founder of Lateral Theory, a digital media company that creates original content for audio, streaming, and film. Sabrina is an executive producer with various credited projects, including the creator, executive producer, and director of the award-winning audiovisual podcast Breaking Bread. Sabrina is the founder and president of the Liberian Business Alliance, a social enterprise committed to the economic development of Liberia. Sabrina is an acclaimed keynote speaker. Her credits include TEDx Fidelity International, Meta, Mediatel, Harvard Business School, House of Lords, Tomicon, and Pension Protection Fund. Sabrina is a fiction and nonfiction writer, sharing her insights and analysis. Sabrina will be publishing her first collection of fictional short stories soon. Sabrina is also an award-winning entrepreneur whose accolades include BAFTA Legend Award recipient and 50 Most Inspirational Black Women in the UK, African Glitz magazine. Sabrina is a Royal Society of Arts, Manufacturing, and Commerce Fellow, a non-executive director, or I should say nonprofit executive director, and trustee whose previous roles have included appointments to Dot Everyone and Theater 503. As a responsible business owner, Sabrina started Build Global Ventures. Build Global Ventures is designed to break the barrier of access to capital experienced by underrepresented founders. Build Global Ventures invests in and advises a select number of companies that are led by underrepresented founders. Companies are researched and selected by the Build Global team. Sabrina is a leader amongst equals, collaborating and forming partnerships, operating with radical candor. Some of her principles include excellence, not perfection, and value, not volume. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest, all the way from across the pond, Sabrina Clarke. All right, Sabrina Clarke. How you doing, sister? You doing good?
I am doing very well, and it's a pleasure to be here with you, Eric. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, first of all, I was honored that you responded so quickly. I have listened to your podcast, and I wish I had that many friends where I could invite to dinner and have a conversation. But unfortunately, I'm not that gracious. So, but I like the format of it. And then the other thing that oh, you're welcome. And then the other thing that appealed to me was on your LinkedIn profile, you talked about the golden brain. So I want to get into that a little bit. But before we get started, what I like to do to break the ice is to throw a quote at the guest. And your quote is this: progress on gender equality can't be measured by legal or cultural norms in isolation, nor the pace determined by the time it takes to reform both. What does that quote mean to you?
So for everyone in context where that quote comes from, I was a delegate for the Council of Status of Women 68, hosted by the United Nations in March of 2024. And that quote comes from a diary format that I did of my entire experience and where I see gender equality progressing and how it should progress. And what that quote means is all of these different entities can't be in isolation. We can't look at the pace of gender equality by the pace of cultural norms because we know how long it takes for things to change. So, for example, paying women what they are valued at, not worth, but valued in the marketplace, has taken almost 70 years, and we're nowhere close to that. So if we were to wait for cultural norms to shift on pay, just on pay alone, it would probably be 70 years from now on that. What about everything else? In 1978, women couldn't even sign for their own credit cards. So we can't wait for cultural norms and the system to speed up at the pace for change. We have to set the pace of change. That's what that quote means.
Yeah, and the scary thing is, Sister Clarke, is that I'm old enough to remember that when my mom couldn't get a credit card because when she was able to get one, oh boy, she got as many of them.
She got one.
She even went and got a driver's license, and she never drove a car. She was what do they call it now? Passenger princess is the term now. She was forever that, and she taught driver's ed, but but only the classroom. But she specifically got a driver's license to get as many credit cards as she could. So before we get any deeper, you're a very, very successful business person in the UK. And one of the things that you are branded as is the golden brain entrepreneur. So explain the concept of the golden brain.
The concept of the golden brain is for individuals who use their left and right brains adeptly. I am somebody who is as technical as I am creative. And so that's why the golden brain entrepreneur very aptly describes me and the portfolio that I've created. As we get into the conversation about business or my businesses, you'll see how geeky and technical I am. But at the same time, you listen to my podcast that I've executive produced. You know that I produce shorts. I also write both fiction and nonfiction. And so I get to explore the creative side of who I am. And those two things don't typically come together in one person, but they do with me.
Now, are you left-handed?
I'm not. I'm a right-handed person.
Okay. So they say that
I bust that myth.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to say. I'm left-handed. They say, oh, well, you use both sides of your brain because you have to write left-handed. And I was like, okay, whatever, So now I can say I have a golden brain. I understand that concept comes from science fiction, the actual language.
No, the language actually comes from science. It's been used in science fiction. So for the people who are Marvelites like me and Trekkies will know or have heard that term through the years, either through Star Trek or the Marvels. So it has been adapted in science fiction, but it does come from science.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm both of those. So yeah, I'm familiar. What lessons have you learned in business that you try to share with other women of color entrepreneurs?
Ooh, there are so many lessons. The first thing I always go back to is make sure you choose the right accountant. Before all the other things, choose the right accountant. That will save you a lot of issues and drama, and it also forces you to think about your cash flow, profitability, all of the non-sexy things that makes a business run effectively. And so that is the core lesson, the first lesson. Secondly, make sure that you build a proposition that is clear that people want to pay for. In my business, I'm a consultant, so I am letting people know things that they haven't thought of and selling them and selling it. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a pain point a client has identified. You can spot it ahead of time and sell it in. So, for example, with business sustainability, everyone's talking about sustainability now. When I started this process, really no one was talking about business sustainability. And so it's being able to identify the gaps in the market and building a proposition around that, and making sure that it's priced appropriately. Pricing is the other thing as well. A lot of times, particularly when it comes to women, we're in a difficult position because there are a group of people who may not want to pay for the services at the value that they should be paying for. So being able to identify your clients, the group of people who will pay you for your service at the rates that they need to pay it at, is very important. So those would be the three things: identifying your accountant and choosing the right one, making sure that you are clear about your proposition, and then ensure that you have the right pricing structure in place.
Yeah, and on the accounting piece, my cousin-in-law was a forensic accountant for like the U.S. government Department of Justice, basically here in the United States.
Oh,
so
interesting.
He did that for a long. Yeah, he did that for a long time, and so when he retired from that, he had like standing business waiting for him to hire him. It's like, hey man, we need you to come on and help us out. So he set up his own consulting firm so he can advise people, what not to do on their books and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, absolutely.
Yeah. So, the accounting piece is not just knowing where your assets and liabilities are, but also how to properly do that so you won't get in trouble with the IRS or anybody else, because that's kind of a downfall that, a lot of our people fall into the trap. We hear stories all the time here in the United States about, famous athletes and celebrities, and, they messed up on their taxes and all that stuff. So when you said that was the first thing, and especially because we have a lot of contractors with the government, and I assume that's the same way in the UK, and minority businesses trying to get government contracts, and, you mess up on that Medicaid or something else, the billing and all that stuff, they coming for you. So
absolutely. And it's two parts. It's the right thing, but also making sure, why I said choose the right accountant is because how many stories have we heard about the accountant stealing from their clients? The client doesn't know, and they still have to serve time, because ultimately, as the business owner, you are responsible for what goes on in your business. Even if you didn't know and you couldn't read a balance sheet or a P&L sheet, the HMRC, which is what it is in the United Kingdom, and the IRS do not care. You are still accountable for that.
Yeah, I almost got caught up with it with with a nonprofit I was working for. So, yes, ladies, men, anybody that's getting into business,
you co-sign, Eric. You co-sign.
You better get you an accountant that you can trust. Somebody that you gotta do it. Amen, sister, to that. Let me ask you this question. So you said that impact is leveraging your voice politically and economically. So how do you navigate the world of politics with your business?
So with my business, I wear a few hats. And when it comes to engaging in politics, I do not with my business. I have to be politically aware, and we have to be politically aware because of the type of business that we do from a Build Global. So for the people listening, I am managing partner of my own business, Build Global, which is a strategy firm here, actually the only strategy firm led by a Black woman, with a combination of services that we provide in this country. And so we provide strategy, transformation, and business sustainability services. From a business sustainability service, And from a strategy service, that's where politics come into play. Because in order to design a corporate strategy, we have to look at what's happening politically in the environment that our clients work in, the businesses that they want to acquire, the governments that are currently in power, or those who may be coming over, and the potential regulations and laws that might impact their cost of business, services, or goods. From a business sustainability perspective, business sustainability, as we define it, is the triple bottom line. So how companies can be profitable by not damaging people, planets, etc. So there, we are looking at the political context for which that company is doing business. We have a particular focus on economic sustainability. So looking at all of the macro factors for which politics is completely intertwined in terms of the parties, in terms of rates, in terms of compliance, regulation. When people come into office, stock markets go up or down or crash. All of these things have an impact. And also there's a lot of lobbying that goes on in everywhere in the world because we provide support to global clients. If people are lobbying, we also have to be aware of that. So for example, energy is one of the sectors that we focus on. There's huge lobbying that happens with oil and gas companies everywhere in the world. So we have to be aware of those dynamics when we're advising clients when it comes to sustainability. Being aware, being savvy about it is how we navigate, but we do not get involved in the foolishness.
Yeah, and that's important that you have to have that balance. As an individual citizen, you have a voice and you have a right, but your company, you have to kind of moderate that a little bit. And in the United States, we put a lot of pressure on companies to get involved in causes. And I explain to people they're not going to get involved unless it's something that improves their bottom line, right? Every now and then you'll have a maverick, but that maverick has enough equity in the bank where they take a position it's not going to hurt them. Like what happened with Disney in Florida. It's like, okay, you want to kick us out of Florida? Really? You think that's going to happen? You know what I'm saying? So, you just have to, you have to be cognizant of where you are and what you're doing. So I think that's important advice to give. Especially, go ahead.
And it's also, it may not improve your bottom line, but you don't want to have a reputational risk by not engaging. So when George Floyd was murdered, everyone in the world was recognizing his murder, and the companies who weren't making statements about it felt the repercussions of their actions. So it may not be commercially viable, but it's a reputational risk, and therefore you are forced to engage. And that's the importance of the public voice and leverage. But ultimately, these are for-profit entities. They are there to make money, and therefore what they do will be aligned specifically to that objective.
Right. Speaking about making money, you've been active in developing trade relationships with your heritage nation of Liberia. How would you advise the African diaspora situated here in America to follow suit?
So Africa's open for business. So my advice to the diaspora is whatever your interest is, you can find that in Liberia, which is my heritage country, in Nigeria, South Africa, Botswana, you name it, over 50, you can find that interest. So the first thing is, what is your interest? And do you want that interest to be commercial, or do you want it to be supportive or enabling? Not everybody going to the continent is interested in business pursuits. They just may want to use their skills to give back in a specific way. So which side of that equation do you sit on? Once you identify that, then what is the best country for you to do that in? I am a Liberian woman, so I will always give my skills back to my heritage country. At the same time, I'm also a Pan-Africanist, so I support all countries, and all of the continent will benefit from my skills. And so some people may have an affinity specifically to Ethiopia, or they may have an affinity specifically to Kenya. And that's where they want to allocate their time. So where do you have your affinity? Where does it align with your interests? The third thing I would say is when you go to actively listen first. Sometimes diasporans have this condescension and arrogance that they take with them, that is not helpful to anyone, and particularly when it comes to building a partnership, which is what we need, partnerships, which is what we need to do. So go with listening first. You have your expertise, but so do the people who are local to the country. And so listen to what they have to say, and you may have to refine. So that is what happened with me with the Liberian Business Alliance. I specifically wanted to focus on trade, entrepreneurs, et cetera, bringing diasporan businesses to the country. I went on the ground and actually I found the greater need was supporting entrepreneurs who are already there. And that wouldn't have happened without me going there with an open mind, actively listening and saying, actually, this is the better approach. So those would be the things that I would advise.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that and being open and honest about it, because there's a dynamic happening in the United States that really, really pisses me off. And in that people that Black Africans, Kulabans, however you want to identify us, that were born here in the United States, there seems to be some kind of rift with our cousins from the continent that come. And it seems to be, it falls under the line of arrogance, right? Of not being open-minded. There's a classic scene from a movie, School Days, where Larry Fishburne's character, who's a Pan-Africanist, is confronting the leader of the fraternity. And he's talking about, we got to connect with Africa, got to get back. And the leader of fraternity says, I'm not from Africa, I'm from Detroit.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I love School Days. I'm a Spike Lee girl. So yeah. Fan of School.
So it's like, now with social media, we're seeing that in real time. And so that's why I was excited to get you on, because you are African, but you are in another, a whole nother continent, just like Africans here. And, you're trying to make that connection. You're trying to enhance relationships. And, we had that kind of spirit here at one point. Leon Sullivan was like a major voice in that. Shout out to West Virginia State University, where my mom went to school. But I feel that tension is inhibiting that. First of all, do you have that kind of tension in the UK, similar to what I just described here in the United States, or is it different because of the history?
The tension is different with two different groups. So I'm aware of the tension in the States, and I'll come to that in just a moment. The tension here is between the Caribbean community and the African community.
Okay.
Who are either first, second, or third generation British. What's interesting about me is some people assume that I'm American, some people assume that I'm Caribbean. A lot of people don't assume that my heritage is African or Liberian. So because they can't quite place me, I'm able to initially be the recipient of different vibes from different groups and different conversations. And that tension is quite visceral because you do have a huge community of different groups. So huge communities of Ghanaians, Nigerians, Jamaicans, et cetera, in the country. And it goes from one extreme to the other, and it's very tribal, and that tension is there. That is different from the tension that I see in the US with American-born Black people or the ADOS community and Black Africans coming into the United States. And part of that fault is on both sides with arrogance. The arrogance and the xenophobia of American-born Black people. I experienced it because I spent some time in the States. That's where my accent partly comes from. I was called an African bush boogie, an African booty scratcher, and all the rest of it from Black people. So there's that xenophobia and that bigotry there. At the same time, with Africans who come into the United States, there is that arrogance, that superiority complex of thinking they're better than Black Americans. The stereotypical ideas of being lazy or we're not one of them and we need to set apart, not really understanding because they come from majority Black countries how damaging white supremacy and racism is and how that is intrinsic in everything. So you have two sides with very distinct issues projecting on each other. Now, are all Africans that way? No, they're not. I'm not. Are all Americans that way? No, they're not. But that rift, in my view, has been amplified over the past, I would say, 7 years. It was in the beginning, like years ago when I was there, because I was called those names. But then it wasn't as much, I would say, as it is now or has been over the past 7, 8 years. And I think a lot of that is probably attributed to the reparations conversation and who should be getting reparations. Should the U.S. government choose to ever give Black people reparations? So even though they do give reparations to everyone, they have given reparations to every other group. And I think it amplifies that. So it's unfortunate because I am, as I said, a Pan-Africanist. I believe that we are successful together, bringing our skill sets, bringing our ideas, bringing our movement across the globe to really further us as a community. So when we get into this infighting with each other, not appreciating our differences, nobody wins when the family feuds.
Right. Exactly. You can't be fighting at the cookout, boys and girls. That's what we trying to tell y'all. You can't be fighting at the cookout. So anyway, because that leads me to a real life tragic story. I'm not gonna go there, but so let's get into that question about comparisons. Are there similarities in the struggles of Blacks in the UK? Are they similar to the struggles that Blacks face in the United States?
The similar struggle is that Black people in the United Kingdom are dealing with racism. That's the similar struggle. Dealing with white supremacy, that is a similar struggle. How racism shows up in the United Kingdom is very different. In the UK, Black people are also dealing with classism, and classism does not show up at all in the US yet. It's starting to, but it does not show up yet at all in the United States. So that layer of racism, of classism, of white supremacy, and then colonialism, which I do not think, having lived in both places, colonialism shows up in the US in the way that it does in the UK. Those would be the differences. It is insidious. It's not explicit. It's death by 1,000 cuts. Yes, you have some explicit incidents, and you will have people killed by the police, people dying, like Stephen Lawrence, etc., in the United Kingdom, a youth that was murdered. But it's very implicit, is very microaggressive on steroids, which makes it difficult to pinpoint unless you know exactly what's going on.
Yeah. So funny story. When the Queen died, I was trying to get some brothers and sisters to come on the podcast from the UK to kind of talk about what that meant. Nobody wanted to get on. Nobody wanted to get on the podcast and do that. But I'm seeing people like Trevor Noah. I'm who's here, but he grew up in South Africa, and I'm seeing, and I was watching the visceral reactions about, because in the United States, the Queen was kind of a lovable figure, right? It was like, oh, she was riding her horses. Oh, she's got her corgis. This cute little woman with the big crown. Okay, it's fine. It's like everybody that's come to the United States and met her, it's like, boom. But then you have to understand the history. And it's like,
yes,
the reason why she's got those jewels is because they took them from this part of the African continent or that part. It was because the sun never set on the British Empire at its highest moment. So a lot of people in the United States, especially some Black folks, were kind of like, well, we could care less about the Queen. And, everybody liked Princess Diana. But, it's like the Queen is what she is. You know what I'm saying? And So it wasn't that connection. So it's like to hear somebody from the UK or somebody, from the countries that used to be under the empire. It was like, so what? She's dead. What difference is that? You know what I'm saying? People were very, very, very cold, and you kind of laughed when I said nobody wanted to talk about it. What was kind of the vibe? Why did a lot of Black people not want to talk about or react to publicly the death of the Queen?
Because, and I will say this because I'm have an affinity, had an affinity, still have an affinity for Queen Elizabeth because of her servant leadership. However, I parse that with, if you were to think about a living embodiment of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade, that is what she represents. She is the empire. And you will not get, and what that doesn't surprise me, a Black person coming on to any platform unless they were right-wing associated or right-wing leaning, talking about her in reverence because of that history. The empire is built on the backs of Black people through slavery. So there is no way to acknowledge that during that time, even though I personally can parse that with the conflicted truth of what she represents, with the conflicted truth of the jewels that she had and what it meant. Liberia was not colonized by the British. It was actually colonized by Americans and specifically Black people. So it's a very different lineage, even though I was born in London. And so because I have the different ingredients that make up my identity, there is a nuance that I can navigate that other people who don't have that in identity cannot. And I completely understand it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's kind of the vibe I was trying to get on, but so I'm glad that you accepted the invitation again, because I mean, seriously, because I mean, it's like, that's the essence of why I do this, is because I want people to understand that it's not just simple as seeing a nice little story in the National Enquirer or the New York Times.
Nice little lady with her handbag walking everywhere. No, it's loaded.
Yeah, there's some loaded history there, just like it's loaded history here. And I'm glad you mentioned the history about Liberia and stuff too. Because I actually had a friend, I forget the lady's name, who was the president of Liberia. I guess she was the first lady. And a friend of mine,
Ellen Johnson Sirleaf.
Yeah, and she said, I'm going to the thing. I said, you're going to the Liberian inauguration? She said, yeah, she's related to me. I said, get out of here. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and then I had to think about it. I said, yeah, that's very, very feasible. Heck, I might need to check and see if I can get an invite. You know what I'm saying? It's like, but most of my folks, according to my DNA check so far, like Nigeria or something like that. But anyway, so let's talk about British politics for a minute. And I want to talk to you about so let me ask you this question. Which had the most impact on your business? Was it the after effects of the pandemic or the after effects of Brexit?
The after effects of the pandemic.
Okay.
Brexit was very good for business. We are in the transformation and strategy space. So the more disruption there is in the world, the better it is for my business.
Okay. All right. That was simple.
I like to keep it 100. Yeah. That's the business I'm in.
Yeah. So now I understand that the British Prime Minister, and forgive me, I don't remember his name right off.
Rishi Sunak.
He's called for elections in July of this year. Am I correct on that?
Yes, on the 4th of July, to be precise. Oh. An interesting choice, I thought.
Well, I mean, it's as they used to say back in the day, that's always kind of cheeky, and as far as cheeky. But kind of explain to my listeners Why is that happening, and what impact can it have on blacks in the UK? Because I think it's very interesting that the United Kingdom is now going to have a major election in the same year that the United States is having a major election that could change the dynamics of how we govern, or we literally could be, in my opinion, we literally could be in an autocracy in the United States. I don't think y'all that extreme over there, although Brexit was kind of considered like an ultra right wing movement or the start of a nationalist movement there. Um, Explain the significance how y'all can just call an election whatever y'all want to, and why this election is important.
So let me give some context. So first of all, 50% of the world is voting this year. So it's not just the UK, it's not just the US, 50%, which is a huge, huge percentage of people voting, and therefore the shifts of power around the world. Rishi Sunak was never voted in. He was never democratically elected as a prime minister. Liz Truss was the prime minister. She lasted for about 2 seconds. They got her out of the Conservative Party, and then he was brought in. He was never elected, and therefore, a general elections would need to happen for the Conservative Party and Labour in order for it to be considered done. I'll put it that way. The Conservative Party has been in power in the United Kingdom now for over 10 years. There is a movement across Europe, the UK, and the US of the right wing. The snap election isn't so snap. We needed to have an election this year. Now, it is within the gift of the prime minister to say when, and he chose the 4th of July. But this is something that the British people have been calling for a period of time, and now it's finally here. What does this election mean for Black people in the UK? It depends on which class you sit in the UK. So if you are a business owner, what it means for me from a tax perspective, I'm very interested in. Corporation tax is currently 19% that I have to pay, period. So I'm interested in corporation tax. I'm interested in national insurance tax, which would be similar to Social Security in the US. I'm interested in all, using contingent workers, contractors, or freelancers. If they're going to change that law, what does that mean? So if you are a business owner, it means something specific for you as a Black person. If you are a landlord, it has its implications. When it comes to social justice, I looked at, for a different reason, the Labour Party, which would be closest to the Democrats in the US, and conservative closest to the Republicans, just to give your audience context. So there are nuances, but in terms of saying which one is aligned to what, they're all focused on healthcare. We know that from a Black and Brown perspective in this country, healthcare is free for everyone, but the wait times are very long. They both want to address that. If there are any pressures in the system, the marginalized gets impacted. Black women in particular, the Black mortality rates in terms of pregnancies is quite high. So if that's not addressed, that directly affects us. When it comes to things like salary, pay, there is a report called the Parker Review that's asking for more transparency on how much Black people, people of color, full stop, of Black people being part of that, are being paid across corporations, and who's in power affects that. They've done it for gender. It's now time that's being done for Black people. Those are the core things. Everything else is still unclear. So the Conservative Party doesn't have a manifesto. They have manifestos in this country that people can go to and read. They're talking about Stop the Boats, which is on immigrations, which is very similar to the Republican focus on the building a wall or the border wall situations. There's nothing else. What does it mean? What does it mean for us? We don't know. So between now and July, and I doubt that it'll be addressed, quite frankly. Between now and July, it'll be very much from a class perspective, but the social things that affect Black people in this country, uh, the majority parties, unclear. So we have to wait and see.
Now, how many viable political parties are there in the UK? Because we always hear about the Labour and the Conservative, but how many? There's actually more than just those two there.
They are. There's roughly about 10 viable. If they form coalitions, they become viable because they pick up pockets of the voting public. So the Liberal Democrats, for example, if they were to form a coalition with Labour, that would be an interesting a coalition. The Scottish National Party or Liberal Democrats, not that that would ever happen, but as an example. But viable are the two leading parties. If the coalition build, then it becomes very interesting.
Yeah, so it's like, and the term I use, viable. I assume that I think there are some Liberal Democrats and Scottish National Party people in Parliament, right? They actually,
Yeah, they're all represented in Parliament, but it's the constituencies that they represent. If the coalition builds, it becomes interesting. So unlike the United States, where it's a two-party system, well, the Green Party exists, but it's really a two-party system. If an independent, runs for president, if they're a billionaire or they get enough votes, they might be viable as a singular person. Unlike the UK, where there are a constituency that exists for these groups. It's not just one person coming out of nowhere. They are represented in Parliament. They are represented in the constituencies in the country.
Yeah, that was great entertainment for me. Turning on C-SPAN on like early Wednesday mornings here in the States, and watching Parliament do their thing. And the way that these folks are acting here, they're kind of getting a little raucous.
I'm like, it was interesting for you. Now I'm sitting here sipping my Earl Grey tea to Beach Blonde Bad Built Butch. I'm here for all of it all.
Oh yeah, it's getting off the chain here, and both of those ladies, it looks like are going to be reelected to their position. So it's going to be interesting to see how that progresses. But yeah, I just I always find it fascinating, and so I'm really I'm glad. Sister Clarke, that you were able to come on. So this is the part of the program where the guest gets to tout what they do and how people can get in touch with them. So go ahead and plug away.
So I spoke about my business Build Global. If you are an energy, financial services, or technology multinational and you want to focus on growing your business outside of the US or expanding in emerging markets or need a business sustainability plan, then reach out to me from a Build Global perspective. We didn't have a conversation about lateral theory, which is my creative side, my company, where I have my own podcast, Breaking Bread, where I have guests around a dinner table to discuss all things politics, cultures, etc., you name it. So you can check me out at Lateral Theory. I also write my own Substack, Sabrina Verse, so you can hear my perspective or read my perspective on a range of things. My latest article just came out is about Puffy, and I tell it that he has power, but is not powerful. And the video was a warning shot. So I explore the dynamics in power, in culture and business. So at Sabrina Verse with the Z or a Z, as we say in the UK, on Instagram, or buildsglobal.com or lateraltheory.com.
All right. Well, Sabrina Clarke, you live up to the Golden Brain label. You are very, very intelligent and very aware of what's going on. And that is a blessing for not only your folks, but it's a blessing for me and my listeners. And I'm really, again, honored that you took the time to come on the podcast. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, now that you've been a guest, this is an open invitation. So anytime you want to come on, just let me know. And, you're more than welcome. And if I happen to be in the UK and you need an American, you can invite me over for dinner. I'd love
Come
to
to
talk.
London. Come to London. You have to let me know when you're here, Eric. You have to give me a heads up. You are welcome anytime. Thank you very much. I mentioned earlier I love politics. So if you ever want to chop it up over politics, I am definitely that girl.
All right, guys. And we'll catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And so now it is time for my next guest, Dr. Agatha Caraballo. Dr. Agatha Caraballo is the founding director of the Maurice A. Ferré Institute for Civic Leadership and an associate teaching professor for the Department of Public Policy and Administration in the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs at Florida International University, Miami's public research university, where she is also an affiliate faculty in the African and African Diaspora Studies and Masters of Arts in Global Affairs programs. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Dr. Agatha Caraballo. All right, Dr. Agatha Caraballo. How bad did I butcher that? Is that okay?
Not too bad. Caraballo.
Caraballo. Caraballo. I got to get my R's. Caraballo. Doctor, how you doing? You doing good?
I'm doing good. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm honored to have you on. I like educators a lot. My mom was a teacher. I dabbled in it a little bit, but I know that it was the professors at Jackson State that really kind of gave me the blessing and the nurturing and all that stuff to get me into politics. So you're definitely one of those people at Florida International. So wanted to give you some shine and and get you to talk a little bit about what you do and why civic leadership / civic engagement is important. But before we get into that, what I do to kind of start the interview off is that I offer a quote to the guests. So your quote is, "Over the years, I've learned that you can change the world by changing one person's life. My life's mission is to help others and do what I can to make this world a better place." What does that quote mean to you?
I love that. And it completely resonates with me. In the sense, as corny as it sounds, I am a firm believer in that, you can change the world by changing one person's, trajectory in the world. I'm very blessed to do what I love and love what I do, as an educator. Even, despite all the challenges and, frustrations that kind of come along with that, I feel very fortunate to work in this position and just to work with so many amazing people, not only the students, the faculty, the staff, the community members. Miami has been very good to me since I moved out here 25 years now. But yeah, no, it's just to introduce myself, as I'm Dr. Agatha Caraballo. I just got promoted, so I'm going to be a teaching professor starting in the fall.
Yeah, congratulations. Now, before you get into that now, and I didn't tell you that in the pre-thing, but I'm one of those people that I don't like to hear my bio while I'm being interviewed. So I've already done the intro. Everybody knows who you are.
Okay.
So that's my fault.
People, I guess, know that in that sense that I'm somebody that I've been very fortunate to work not only as a faculty, but also as an administrator, and just, have opportunities to get involved in my community and hopefully inspire others to do the same.
Yeah, yeah, and I apologize for that, for telling you that, but yeah, I've done a lot of
Pretty
interviews.
previous.
Yeah, I've done a lot of interviews, and and it's like, and Eric Fleming did this, and it's look, this is not a eulogy. Let's get on with the conversation. All right, so, but I do want you to talk about the institute. So this is the Maurice A. Ferré Institute for Civic Leadership. Talk about how it got started, who it's named for, and what is the mission of the institute.
Absolutely. So for those who may not know, Maurice Ferré was a former mayor and a public service servant in Miami, Florida. He started his career in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s as a state legislator in Florida, then later went on to be on a city commissioner and then the mayor of Miami from 1973 to 1985. Which anybody who kind of associates Miami and the whole Miami Vice period, this was a very tumultuous time in Miami's history. So he was the first Puerto Rican-born mayor, first Hispanic mayor of Miami, but really significantly became mayor of Miami at a time when the Hispanic population was nowhere where it is today. While he was in office, especially in 1980, he was dealing with the McDuffie race riots, the Mariel boat lift, the Cocaine Cowboys, just a host of other issues. But, just I think what was really notable and what I've learned about him and from his history and working with his family is just how inclusive and visionary he really was. He envisioned Miami as this modern metropolitan city that would be the gateway to the Americas and envisioned ways to bring Black, brown, and white communities together. So when he passed away in 2019, the family was approached by FIU to create this institute in his honor and his legacy. The park in downtown Miami, that's also where the Frost Museum and the Pam Art Museum was recently renamed also in his honor, the Maurice Ferré Park in downtown. But this institute, really what our mission is to promote civic leadership and engagement, community infrastructure. He was a big proponent of public transportation, affordable housing, economic development, really, lured the international banks to Miami that really insulated it during the 80s and the economic recession. But the other thing is social justice. He was the first to appoint a Black city attorney, a Black chief of staff, as working with him. But I think what was all really significant learning about him was that he worked to desegregate his own police and fire departments in the 80s. So that's kind of our mission, is through those civic leadership, community infrastructure, and social justice, and then doing that through academic programs. We have certificates, micro-credentials, badges, fellowships, internships, which I can go on all day about. But also we just have a wealth of archives and documents, photos from that time period. We've been doing interviews with past and present leaders, and then really just working with community partners to promote civic leadership, not only in South Florida, but, across the country and globally.
So how did an immigrant from Paraguay become the director of the Ferré Institute, and how did that journey shape your work in civic leadership?
I found this question to be interesting because I was born in Asunción, Paraguay, but only as a U.S. citizen born abroad, because my dad was serving in the Peace Corps at the time. My dad's from Connecticut, old American. My grandmother's maiden name is Standish, as in Miles Standish. So they go back, generations. And then my mom's from Brazil. So Afro-Brazilian, was working in Paraguay. My parents met. I have an older sister who was also born in Brazil, but then we immigrated to the United States when I was 6 months old. First, Connecticut, Colorado, ended up in California. Spent most of my childhood growing up first in Southern California and then Northern California. And then after high school graduation, after I got my associate's degree from a community college in California, I decided to move out here to Miami, where my mom was living at the time. My parents were divorced. And coming here to Miami was interesting. I ended up at FIU kind of accidentally. After I came back and got my PhD in public affairs, I started as a faculty member at FIU, digital instructor. So I teach almost fully online classes at FIU for the past 12, 13 years. So when the Institute came about, they were looking for a faculty member who would run the Institute. And I think what really kind of, I guess, my former dean, John Stack, may he rest in peace. I think he recognized that a lot of my extracurricular activities were focused on civic leadership and engagement. So it was something that I was already doing on my own time. Now I could align it with the Institute. So that's my short spiel how I got here.
So you were a hellraiser, what Dr. The Dean was saying, and he said, yeah, we can put her in that spot.
Well, I think in the sense that like I said, I got very fortunate that my extracurricular activities aligned with the mission of the Institute. I always say I'm very fortunate to do what I love and love what I do. And sometimes, like I said, I have good days, I have bad days, but overall, I just feel very fortunate to do this work.
So why is civic engagement important, especially to people of color in this nation? What, in other words, what drives you to do what you do, and why is it important for people to be involved?
Oh, like I said, I definitely, that could take more than an hour. I'm not going to go on my soapbox and go into a full lecture, but people just need to realize their power, and especially in a sense that if it wasn't power, they wouldn't try to keep you from exercising it. I think the fact that, through the civil rights movement, we had the opportunity to go up to Atlanta to interview Ambassador Andrew Young as part of our video series. And when you realize how hard these rights were fought to take them for granted. And what was interesting is when I first started this institute, some of the first students to get involved were international students, coincidentally students from Venezuela who couldn't even vote in this country, but were very active in wanting to get the word out, do voter education, voter registration. And so I've always said that, people are going to give in different ways, whether it's time, it's money, it's effort, but people shouldn't downplay their contributions and the difference that they can make. Finding the ways that you can help move the needle, like I said, in little or big ways, but to the extent that you can, is I think kind of the message that I've been put. And I'm really proud to have seen students and colleagues go on to run for office, to start nonprofits, to just find different and creative ways to give back and to find how they can try and make, I'm very sappy in that sense, we're in a better place.
Yeah, I you run into that even in the times that we're in. We still see a lot of people, young, old, that say, well, this don't make a difference. And I try to make it very simple. One, when I used to go into schools and talk to students, I would tell them when I was born, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were still alive. Now, that gets their attention because they like going, ooh, we didn't realize you was that old. Of course, Malcolm X died like 20 days after I was born, but he was alive when I was born. So, I try to put it in context. It's like, and I've been very fortunate that I was around people like Andrew Young and Jesse Jackson Sr. and James Orange and James, I even though they were older than, as far as when they became famous, as though they were more like legacies and leaders at that point. Just being around them and them still taking the time to talk to somebody like me and others, gave me the encouragement to keep pushing on. And I assume that's kind of the same mission with this institute to make sure that these students are connected with people like that and that are still around, and even the leaders of today.
Absolutely.
And so that leads me to a question. I'm going to jump to it because it's kind of in my train of thought. Speaking about leaders of the day, even though the Congressman Maxwell Frost is not the congressman in the Miami area, how has his election to Congress impacted the students? So do they relate to that? He's been there now 2 years, but did his election kind of stir up something that you noticed on campus?
In the sense that I wish he was in our own backyard, because I think it would be easier to kind of visualize and to see that kind of firsthand. I do think that they're excited that they're starting to see more representation. I can think of a former FIU student body president that's now a Florida state senator. So they've seen, their colleagues go on to office. And I do think that they're seeing that, the fact that it is possible through AOC, through Maxwell Frost, that younger generations can get elected into office and kind of hold their own. And that it's not as much of a barrier, that, there is a grassroots approach as opposed to the big, funding up models to get yourself into office. And we're seeing at the local level, the state level, and federal level. It is nice to see it in that high profile model. Would love to have him come and speak, someday. But yeah, I think it is starting to get in sense, but I think in one sense, it can only be at the federal level. We really just have to also start getting people to engage at their state and local level.
Yeah, it's very important. It's like those stop signs don't magically appear, right? These streets don't magically get paved, and people don't understand that. Well, I say people. Certain people don't understand that they've got to focus in, because everybody goes and votes for the president, right? That's usually your highest turnout, but it's like the mayor and your city council, county commissioners, school board, all those folks impact you on a day-to-day basis. And we need our people to be more engaged in that. So it's encouraging to hear that some of the students have already ventured off into running for local offices, and that they're engaged in some of those campaigns. So that's really, really encouraging. You're a professor. So I'm gonna need you to give a grade on something. How would you grade America's civic engagement? Are we passing? Do we need a remedial class? What are we doing? How are we doing?
If it was a group project, I'd say we have a C. There are some that are trying really hard, and then there are some that are just dragging it down. So. But again, we're all in this together. So as much as I'd like to say that the results do vary, but I do want to recognize that it's a collective of individual, parties. Like I said, I still want to believe that there are those who are more encouraged and more motivated than ever to make a difference. But again, they're also working against those who are perhaps actively trying to sabotage.
Yeah, I thought you were going to give a harsher grade. I probably should have had you as a professor back in the day.
I am an eternal optimist, so I think that they can churn it around.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good, because I just, my issue with our civic engagement goes back to the argument that sometimes I say his name, sometimes I don't. But I say this old slaveholder once said, the best way to protect democracy is to have educated folks. And I don't know if it's the fault of public schools. I don't know if it's the fault of private schools. I don't know if it's the fault of the individuals. But it seems like our level of political efficacy is very, very low. We basically believe anything that flies through, whether it's through our telephone or on TV or what have you. How do we combat that? How do we get more people? Because you're part of a special thing, like students have to apply to get into your institute on campus, right? So how do we incorporate a level? I mean, they don't have to be political junkies like us, but you know what I'm saying? I think if you had a much better educated public, that we would have a better caliber of public servants. That's my theory.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that's the biggest service that we can do. Teaching public administration, the one thing that I hope public administrators learn besides the planning, the organizing, the staffing, coordinating, and all that is just how to be ethical, good people that, do no harm in their community. And I think that unfortunately, with everything that the internet and everything has come, there's a lot of misinformation with the throw out of the fairness doctrine. Of course, there's a lot of bias, and people feed into their own media bias by self-selecting, what information they're going to consume. So I think that's part of it is fact checking, being knowing where to find the exceedingly rare, unbiased information that is out there. I remember back in the days, of course, it was checking things on Snopes, fact checking and, being able to dispel. But, when you have lies just so easily recycled and repeated and at the highest level from our elected officials, from our media pundits, then again, it's hard to know what to believe. I think one thing that we've been really trying to focus on through the Institute is, of course, just community education and information. We did a webinar in the spring with supervisors of elections to talk about, what they're really kind of dealing with leading up to the election, but wanting to do things like we'll have a bagels and ballots, which will be decoding the ballot and going through the different amendments and things on there. And I think that we just need to be able to, because at this point, well, education is still considered to be a trustworthy and unbiased and resource. I think we have to kind of build on that, because as much as I would like to rely on the media to kind of get that straight, I think that as educators, we have to go in and try and fact check and provide, unbiased, nonpartisan, non-political, correct information as much as possible.
Yeah. Education is the key. If you didn't pick up, the slaveholder I'm talking about was Thomas Jefferson. I don't have anything personal against Thomas Jefferson other than, he was a slaveholder, but he wrote one of the most incredible documents ever. And I think if it wasn't for the Declaration and, his philosophy about stuff, I don't know where our country would be. Which is kind of one of the weird dichotomies, right, about our country.
Speaking of dichotomies, it's so funny because as a public administrator, we always teach about, one of the seminal documents on public administration came from, former President Woodrow Wilson. So having to kind of reconcile that our field kind of ties back to this, initial article, but at the same time, the resistance rates and the damage that was done during his presidency. So it's part of these conversations and wanting to educate students. And in my point, I've gotten to the point where because of the different restrictions that have been put on higher education, getting to a point where I think with a lot of educators, we feel less inclined to want to share our own personal views and biases and more just presenting information and allowing students to draw their own conclusions.
Well, that's a perfect tie-in for my next question. There was this guy that worked with the A. Philip Randolph Institute, and he said in America, if we didn't participate in anything that discriminated against us, we'd never participate in anything. So we've always had to deal with the dichotomy stuff. But, Florida is a very interesting place right now, politically.
Absolutely.
So what is your challenge as an educator to keep students engaged? You say you're an optimist. How do you navigate through all of this stuff? Because there's good stuff happening in Florida politically too, but how do you navigate all that stuff uh, and stay motivated and use it as a teachable moment?
Okay, no, that's a good question to ask. So I teach two classes most frequently, and in the fall I'll be teaching them an undergraduate policy class and a graduate level policy class. So I have the students do things like write policy memos, do infographics, do presentations as if they're presenting in front of a city council or city commission, 2 to 3 minute limits. But I think in those exercises, I allow them to find a topic that they're passionate about. And a lot of times I ask them to tie it to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So whether it has to do with life on land, poverty, gender issues. And I think just through those exercises, getting people to realize the power that they have, how a lot of these policy issues start with grassroots levels. It's a small group of individuals. And how these things catch work and what's the process of getting these things through and improving them and reforming them. But it all starts with little nuggets of ideas. And it starts with a movement and how those movements get bigger. And I think just looking at different examples, students start to see how they can, influence policy, sometimes for good or bad in their communities, but just recognizing the power that they hold, collectively.
Yeah. So to kind of tie that in, Florida International has not been on the news like Columbia or UCLA dealing with the protests that have been going on, especially dealing with the Israeli-Hamas conflict. But I assume that students are engaged. So staying with the teachable moment, how have you as an educator and your colleagues tried to guide the students in a way to teach them how to express themselves and to understand that expressing themselves is okay without being racist, without being hateful?
And we did have a protest on campus, and I had a conversation with the campus police chief, in the sense that they want to protect the right to protest and to try, as long as everybody's kind of safe. I think what really kind of set our campus apart from a lot of other students is, and I've always said that, is that a lot of our students just don't have the privilege in the sense that they're working, they're taking care of families, even like within my own program that I teach, even though it's an undergraduate program, the age skews higher because those students are more likely to be working adults, taking care of parents, taking care of children. In the sense they don't have that luxury to kind of stop everything that they're doing. They may do it for a couple of hours one day that's kind of on there, but it's not going to be a recurring, ongoing thing. Not to say that they're not writing letters to the editor, they're not, reaching out to their administrators, and they're not finding other ways. They're writing memorandums to faculty assembly. So they're finding different ways to be vocal and to be active. Along those lines, I'm working with, for example, 2 students right now who are coming in as Ferré Fellows. They felt a need after all of the state legislation to establish a Pride Student Union at FIU, so that students, LGBT students could have an organization, that was advocating for their issues. And along out of that also came a disabled student union. So I think they're realizing their power and being able to organize and to push for change and for resources through the university, through the state, by partnering with community organizations, and just finding out that there's other ways for them to organize and to move their cause forward.
That's cool. I was in student government. I was student body president. So,
Yes.
we didn't have a separate institute. It was like, a lot of us were political science, pre-law majors that were involved in student government. Although we had, because it was a college, you had a biology major here, a PE major there, music major, whatever. But, we didn't have something that was at that time geared toward advancing. We Jackson State has that now, but we didn't have it then. And so I think that's a very, very valuable asset that you have there. So this
I'm
is your
actually really
chance.
glad that you brought that up. Because the other thing that we're doing with the Institute and with my department, as you mentioned, the students who are usually in student government and others on the political science, the public administrator, these are the students that intrinsically have this motivation to want to, make their communities better. We're currently launching this program in the fall through the Paul Volcker Alliance, which is the Next Gen Public Service course, which is to motivate students from across all majors to consider public service careers. So your criminal justice majors, your English majors, your biology, your psychology, helping them to recognize through public service, whether it's local, state, federal government, there, are public service pathways for them to be able to give back in their communities and to make a career out of it as well.
So let's keep on with the plug. How can students get involved with the Institute? If they're saying, hey, well, I want to go to Florida International and that Institute sounds pretty good, or a parent's like, yeah, my child might be good at that. How can people get in touch with you and the Institute and so on?
So interestingly enough, through our institute, we actually have a certificate, an undergraduate certificate and a graduate certificate in civic leadership engagement. So those are open to both degree and non-degree seeking students. So someone could be a non-degree seeking student at FIU, take the certificate, and then decide that they'd like to do a whole degree, and have those credits applied towards a full degree. If a student's already at FIU, regardless of their major, they can also take the certificate, or we have a free micro-credential, which is about 12 hours. It kind of gives an overview of Government 101, the difference between local, state, federal government, contacting your representative, and then again, tying voting to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Students also have opportunities to get involved through fellowships. These are service learning projects where students basically can qualify for stipends, travel support. They work on a service learning project, either through communications, community outreach, or other projects. And then scholarships. One of my proudest accomplishments since I've been at the helm is that we've raised over $1 million for student scholarships, including a very generous gift from not only the Anthony Abraham Foundation, but the Miguel Fernandez Family Foundation as well. So wanting to prioritize, assistance for our students to be able to do unpaid internships, community service projects, volunteers without, financial hardship being a barrier.
That's cool. And if people wanted to get in touch with you directly, how does that work?
An easy way would be go to our link tree, FIU Ferré, or to our website, Ferré, FERRE.FIU.edu. On there, they can connect with us on social media. You can make an appointment with me via my Calendly appointment to meet and talk. But just always happy to connect and engage with anyone who's interested in working towards this common goal of, increasing civic engagement and leadership in our communities.
And the most important thing you said during the interview was do no harm. Whenever somebody that I know gets elected to something, the very first thing I send them, other than congratulations, is remember, do no harm. I think that is vitally important in this day and age in our political discussions, to get leaders that have that mindset. So I'm honored, Dr. Caraballo, to have you on the podcast and to know that you are out there doing that kind of work. And I greatly appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you so much. And like I said, I appreciate you in the sense of, in the same vein. And thank you again just for this opportunity to highlight the work that we're doing and encourage others to join us, and feel free to reach out.
All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right. And we are back. So I want to thank Sister Clarke and Dr. Caraballo for coming on the podcast. And I hope that y'all got some encouragement out of that. one, that us black folks in the United States are not alone in our struggles to seek justice and equality and equity. And politics is important, right? Both of those sisters stress that. Politics is important. What we do is important. But the other thing that's important is the overall concept of this American institution of government. And, people are trying to parse and say, it's a democracy, it's a constitutional republic, it's a, whatever. Democratic republic. This is the United States of America. And I just really would hope that, maybe not in my lifetime, but at some point in time, that we get to what's really important, which is how we're going to solve our problems instead of prostrating ourselves to a particular party or a particular candidate and willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater in how we view politics. We use the analogy, those of us that have been involved in politics, is, it's a game, it's a sport, all that kind of stuff. But the difference between an actual athletic event and politics is that politics is really supposed to be the arena for ideas, not just skill or spectacular moments. It's about the nitty gritty, about hashing out ideas to make society better. And we have to regulate ourselves. The Bible, even for those who believe, the Bible even talks about relegating ourselves, governing ourselves. It's ordained by God even. And that we should pray and respect our leaders. So, I'm old enough to remember O.J. Simpson and how the country, and it's been, 30 years? How the country was feeling, or just about 30 years, how the country was feeling at that point. Over the decision. And, over time, we understand the dynamics and all that stuff better if we're students of history and we remove ourselves from that immediate moment and kind of look at the big picture of what was happening. And I guess we're going to have to do the same thing with President Trump. I think we're going to have to, over time, remove ourselves from the emotion of the moment to see what really the big picture was. But I do have a fundamental problem with elected officials trashing the criminal justice system to the extent that they're disparaging citizens. All my life, I've been trying to get young people to register to vote to do two things. One, to actually vote and pay attention to the candidates running for office and picking the one that's going to be the most important for you or the one that you think really can do the job, right? But then the other thing I was encouraging young people to do was to register to vote so they could be on juries, right? And, I would ask the question, how many of y'all had somebody in your family go through the criminal justice system? And a lot of the kids in my district raised their hands, right? And, what I explained to them was that they would have a better shot if more of us were in the jury pools. Not necessarily saying that if black folks on juries, that black folks are going to get acquitted, but it's a fair shot. And in Mississippi, that historical context is very important because there's a lot of people that should have went to jail in Mississippi back in the days that didn't go because it wasn't an inclusive process in the jury system, right? Donald Trump can't say that. There literally was somebody on the jury that the only news they get is from him. True Social. That's the only news source they have. But that person felt that Donald Trump was guilty, along with the 11 other jurors. So when you have these politicians saying, oh, but it's a travesty, it's a sham, and all that stuff, it's like, do like Trump's attorney did. Trump's attorney was not pleased that his client had to go through a trial, but he didn't disparage the jury. He commended them for being attentive. He commended them for making a decision based on the information they were given, even though he didn't agree with it. And he really had nothing bad to say about the jurors. It was, now, whether he felt the judge gave him a fair shake or the fact that his client got charged with anything, yeah, he was upset about that. But he respected the process. And in this march to being sycophants, a lot of these elected officials are not saying that. And, there are some people that are happy. There are some people that are sad. We get that. People were happy and sad when OJ was found innocent in the court of law. But, it didn't get to the point where folks were hanging their U.S. flags upside down and threatening violence and all that kind of stuff. And it definitely wasn't elected officials saying crazy things. If anything, they were trying to be respectful of the process and trying to tell people, hey, guys, that happens. Keep it moving. That's why you have attorneys for the defense and the prosecution. So, and the criminal justice bar is the highest bar, beyond a reasonable doubt. So, if those 12 people didn't have any doubt, then the state proved their case. If there was any doubt, then it was either going to be a hung jury or acquittal. That's how it goes. And, the question I asked the black folks that are upset about the Trump verdict is like, would you have been upset if Derek Chauvin had been found innocent? Were you upset that nobody from involved with Freddie Gray's death in Baltimore went to jail except the attorney that tried to put the officers in jail, right? And she went to jail for something else, spending her own money. There's obviously some nuance to that, but that's, Sister Mosby was the prosecutor trying to put people in jail, and those officers were acquitted. But I didn't see y'all getting upset about that, right? I didn't see you coming to her defense. As a matter of fact, you've been trying to throw her under the bus since she's had her own legal challenges. So I understand of my color, but not my kind. I get it. But, if I'm Donald Trump, yeah, I'm upset. If I'm not Donald Trump, hey, it's time to make some decisions. We going to still ride with this dude, or we going to do something else? Because he went through the process. But you don't trash the process, because if you trash the process for your guy, guess what's not going to be there when you're in trouble or somebody you care about is in trouble? That process is not going to be there. You ain't got to be happy with the verdict, but you don't trash the process, right? No matter how flawed the individuals were who created the process is what it is. What we have to make sure is that people that are in power don't abuse the power. And for those saying, well, Joe Biden had nothing to do with it. As a matter of fact, he really didn't want to say anything because the verdict happened on the anniversary of his son's death, and he usually just kind of checks out. So he really didn't want to say anything at all, let alone, and it's amazing to me that people say, well, he's tipping the scale. If I'm just going to say it for me, and I might have said this before, if I'm going to tip the scale, I'm not going to make it close. If I'm going to cheat, I'm cheating all the way. I'm not going to cheat just to make it look good. No. I'm going to cheat to win. If I'm trying to win an election, I'm going to win every precinct. I'm not going to give you any if I'm cheating. If I'm trying to, get a verdict and stuff, then I do like the folks did down in Mississippi back in the day and just have all of my people in the room. You wouldn't have no choice but my people. That didn't happen. Joe Biden won the election fair and square, and he had nothing to do with Donald Trump being found guilty. If there's anybody to blame for Donald Trump losing an election and Donald Trump being found guilty, it's Donald Trump. Period. End of story. And if you are too biased to see that, then you are too biased to lead. Human beings let us down. We are not perfect. I've let people down. People have let me down. That's part of the human experience. Mistakes we learn from, keep it moving. We don't gain anything by not having accountability. We don't grow, we don't learn if we don't have accountability. We can't improve. We can't move forward. We can't progress if we don't have accountability. And that's really what the criminal justice system is supposed to be about, and the civil justice system, to be honest. It's supposed to be about accountability. Just like we don't want people going around killing folks, we don't want folks abusing employees or making places unsafe for us to walk. That's how that works. So, I don't get any joy out of seeing somebody go through drama. What I do hope is that that person comes out on the other side a better person. But if we don't acknowledge that that person did something wrong, they're not going to get any better. And for a political party to not do that to their leader, that party's not going to be any better. It's just facts. While everybody was running up and trying to be seen at Donald Trump's trial, you didn't see a Democrat at Bob Menendez's trial. That's going on right now at the same time. Nobody, you didn't even see Cory Booker, who's the other senator from New Jersey, showing up. That's not how that works. The whole idea is to let the system play it out, and it still hasn't played out. He still hasn't been sentenced yet. Donald Trump still can appeal. So it's not over. This particular phase of it is, but it's not over. And if he wants to run for president of the United States as a convicted felon, so be it. Eugene Debs did it and got over 1 million some votes. He was actually in a jail. So it is what it is. If you want to vote for that guy, that's on you. If he was, as a free man, I wasn't going to vote for him. And I've been trying to encourage people not to vote for him. But it's not because, or just because I'm a Democrat. I just believe in the Constitution. I believe in the Declaration of Independence. I believe in the United States of America. Despite all its flaws, despite its dichotomous history, this is the greatest nation in the world. And we should strive to have the greatest people serve in leadership of the greatest nation in the world. So anyway, that's just my thoughts, y'all. Again, I want to thank my guests for coming on, and I just want us to get into a mindset of not doing any harm. If we get leaders to understand that statesmanship is about the next generation, and that your commitment is to do no harm in your job, America will continue to be the greatest nation on earth. Until next time.